Long before the ink of European maps spilled over the African coasts, in the heart of what is now Ghana, the Ashanti people told stories of a god who was more spider than man, and more mind than muscle. His name was Anansi, and he wasn't just a trickster, he was a force of disruption. He could climb between realms, earth and sky, God and man, wisdom and mischief, and he spun webs that bound not just insects, but the entire human imagination. Anansi was no ordinary deity. In the Akan cosmology, he wasn't a creator god, but something even more dangerous, a storyteller. Stories were power. Stories taught, healed, controlled. And Anansi wanted them all. To the Akan people, storytelling wasn't entertainment, it was a sacred act. Whoever owned the stories controlled history, morality, and memory. So Anansi set his eyes on the sky god Niam, the keeper of all tales. What followed was a tale that still echoes through generations. Anansi, the small spider, dared to approach the mighty Niam to purchase the stories of the world. But the sky god did not give knowledge freely, he set Anansi on an impossible quest, capture the world's fiercest creatures. To Niam, this was a death sentence. But to Anansi, it was a puzzle. Using nothing but his guile, his charm, and his ability to manipulate enemies into allies and friends into fools, Anansi captured a python, a leopard, and even hornets, each one more dangerous than the last. He did not fight them. He outwitted them. And in doing so, he changed the fabric of myth itself. For the first time, victory didn't belong to the strong, it belonged to the clever. When Anansi delivered the beasts to Niam, the sky god was stunned. Not only had Anansi completed the challenge, but he'd done so without shedding blood. Niam surrendered the stories, and Anansi became the god of wisdom, tales, and cunning. From then on, every story told was called a Kweku Anansi story. A god had been tricked. A spider had become a legend. In the realm of myth, the strongest gods hurl lightning and shake mountains, but Anansi conquers with cunning. His greatest weapon wasn't a sword or spell, but his insatiable appetite for manipulation. No one, human, animal, or divine, was beyond his schemes. He played the fool to unmask the wise, the victim to defeat the powerful, and the friend to destroy the unsuspecting. Anansi's world was a chessboard, and every god, king, and creature was a piece to be moved, or sacrificed. Take the infamous tale of Anansi and the pot of wisdom. After collecting all the wisdom in the world and storing it in a pot, Anansi tried to hide it atop the tallest tree, keeping the power for himself. But as he climbed, he struggled, for he foolishly tied the pot in front of him. His son Takuma, watching from below, innocently suggested tying it behind his back for easier climbing. Anansi realized then, even after hoarding all the world's knowledge, his child outwitted him. In rage, or shame, he hurled the pot to the ground, scattering wisdom across the earth. Ironically, the god of wisdom became its biggest fool, proving that intelligence without humility is its own trap. But Anansi's trickery wasn't always harmless. He betrayed allies, manipulated his wife Aso, and often profited from others' misfortune. In the tale of Anansi and the turtle, he invited Turtle to dinner but gave him no food, using etiquette as an excuse. Later, when Anansi visited Turtle's underwater home for a feast, the tables turned, literally. Turtle demanded Anansi wear proper attire, which meant weighted clothes. Anansi drowned, and the meal slipped away. Trickery, when used without restraint, invites poetic justice. Even the master of deception could be deceived. These stories weren't just jokes, they were coded lessons passed through generations. Anansi exposed greed, arrogance, and hypocrisy, sometimes reflecting the very society that preserved him. In a time when direct resistance to authority could be fatal, Anansi became the safe conduit for subversion. Kings, chiefs, even gods could be ridiculed in an Anansi tale. He gave voice to the voiceless, mockery to the oppressed, and cleverness to those forbidden from open rebellion. Anansi was never good in the way saints are good. He was messy, morally gray, delightfully unpredictable. Yet that's what made him timeless. In a world where brute force often ruled, Anansi showed that a sharp tongue and a sharper mind could bend fate itself. He wasn't just the trickster, he was the supreme architect of manipulation, and his tricks would become survival tools for an entire people sailing into darkness. If knowledge is power, then Anansi was the most dangerous being alive. Not content with merely telling stories, Anansi once dared to own wisdom itself. After tricking the gods and capturing terrifying creatures, he was rewarded with stories, but he wanted more. He wanted to monopolize wisdom, to control every drop of insight, counsel, and cleverness in the world. And so, he collected it all, proverbs, secrets, strategies, warnings, and stuffed it into a clay pot. The world fell quiet. With no wisdom left, only Anansi could speak with insight. It was a god-level data heist, centuries before data even existed. But Anansi wasn't just hoarding for power. He wanted to pass it to his descendants, to ensure his bloodline reigned supreme. So he decided to hide the pot in a place no one could reach, the tallest tree in the forest. Yet irony stalks the clever. As he struggled up the tree, frustrated by the pot banging against his belly, his young son Takuma casually offered advice. "Tie it behind you." Anansi froze. He, the god of intelligence, had been outwitted by a child. That singular moment shattered his illusion. In rage or in revelation, he smashed the pot, and wisdom, once monopolized, was scattered across the earth. That act became one of Anansi's most profound legacies. It explains why no one person can ever hold all wisdom, because it belongs to everyone. Farmers, elders, children, beggars, each holds a shard. The Ashanti believed this scattering democratized knowledge. It was no longer divine, it was human, raw, and reachable. Anansi's act, whether accidental or intentional, became a mythic origin for humility in intelligence. Even the cleverest must listen. Even the powerful must learn. But the tale also echoes deeper truths. Anansi's greed to control wisdom mirrors how kings, priests, and colonialists sought to dominate knowledge systems. In many African traditions, wisdom was communal, shared through proverbs, parables, and songs. Anansi's story warns against those who hoard understanding for personal gain, and it celebrates the unexpected sources of insight, the voices of the young, the marginalized, the seemingly simple. Thus, Anansi transformed again, from hoarder to liberator. His failure birthed a more equal world. And the stories that followed, told in whispers by firelight, shouted in markets, or reimagined in classrooms, carried the echoes of that shattered pot. A world where wisdom is not sold, but shared. Where even a spider's downfall can uplift a civilization. Anansi didn't just outsmart the gods, he changed how we understand intelligence itself. As European ships carved wounds across the West African coasts, snatching lives and silencing kingdoms, Anansi slipped through the chains, not in flesh, but in spirit. Though men were shackled and shipped across the Atlantic, Anansi sailed in their memories, woven into the songs, stories, and whispered tales told in the dark bellies of slave ships. Where swords failed, stories survived. And among all the spirits and myths carried to the Americas, none were as enduring, or subversive, as Anansi, the spider god who never stayed caught. In the Caribbean plantations, where African languages were banned and drums silenced, Anansi re-emerged, sometimes as Anansi, sometimes as Br a rabbit, always with the same defiant core. To enslaved Africans stripped of power, Anansi became more than a tale, he was a symbol of resistance. He outsmarted powerful beasts, evaded death, and used trickery to claim victory over stronger enemies. He was the blueprint for psychological warfare against oppression, offering laughter in despair, cleverness against brutality, and hope in the face of inescapable servitude. Slave owners had no idea that the bedtime stories told in broken tongues were actually covert lessons in survival and rebellion. Anansi taught when to speak and when to stay silent, how to twist the rules without breaking them, how to live when the world wants you dead. In Haiti, Jamaica, Suriname, and the American South, the trickster spirit became embedded in oral cultures, coded in dialects, preserved in griot traditions and Creole folktales. Anansi wasn't just entertainment, he was encrypted resistance. But colonialism wasn't only physical, it sought to erase memory, to sever Africans from their gods, languages, and ancestral truths. Missionaries painted Anansi as a pagan relic, something to forget. Schools rewrote African minds with foreign myths. Yet Anansi adapted. Like a virus in the code, he changed shapes. He survived as Eshu in Nigeria, as Compere Lapin in Louisiana, even as Bugs Bunny in pop culture. His core message, survive through wit, not war, remained unchanged, morphing across centuries to speak to each new generation. In a world burning under the weight of empire, Anansi became a quiet fire that refused to be put out. Carried by the enslaved but never enslaved himself, he whispered freedom between the lines of fairy tales. Long before guerrilla fighters or political revolutionaries, Anansi was the first rebel of the Black Atlantic, outwitting the world one trick at a time. His shadow danced behind the slave's smile and echoed in the laughter that defied despair. In every corner where the whip cracked, Anansi spun a web, and taught the oppressed how to slip through it. Anansi didn't just trick strangers and enemies, he betrayed friends, family, and even fellow gods. His legacy is tangled not just in wisdom and survival, but in ruthless self-interest. In one tale, Anansi stole food from a communal gathering and framed his own friend. In another, he lied to his wife Aso to escape consequences for a botched scheme. He betrayed every alliance when it suited him. But these betrayals weren't random, they mirrored the complicated moral landscape of survival under oppression, scarcity, and hierarchy. This darker side of Anansi fascinated elders and frightened children. He wasn't always likable. He manipulated trust to gain advantage, often leaving destruction in his wake. In one chilling tale, Anansi learns of death's arrival and tricks another creature into taking his place. The other dies. Anansi lives. Audiences would gasp, not because it was heroic, but because it was real. Sometimes, in the game of life, the clever win while the innocent fall. The trickster reminded people that justice isn't always neat, and wisdom often wears a crooked smile. But betrayal, in Anansi's world, wasn't evil, it was strategic. In Akan traditions, these stories weren't meant to glorify his betrayals but to reveal the harsh truths of power, cunning, and consequence. In communities where navigating treachery, whether from colonial rulers, corrupt chiefs, or violent systems, was part of daily life, Anansi taught that betrayal could be a survival tactic. That in the face of a rigged world, loyalty could be a luxury, and cunning might be the only way out. What makes Anansi so compelling is that he never pretended to be noble. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, he was an anti-hero, centuries before the term existed. His betrayals warned listeners not just about others, but about themselves. How far would you go to survive? Would you lie to eat? Would you betray to live another day? Anansi's tales forced communities to wrestle with uncomfortable truths, making his stories not just entertaining, but ethically complex. Thus, his betrayals became legacy. They taught future generations that life is rarely black and white. That every deal has a cost, every smile a shadow. Anansi was a mirror, not a model, reflecting the ugliest and cleverest parts of human nature. In doing so, he laid the groundwork for a cultural tradition of storytelling that embraces nuance, contradiction, and uncomfortable wisdom. Anansi didn't just spin webs, he spun moral puzzles that still entangle us today. Anansi may have been born in West Africa, but his web spans continents. Through the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade and the resilience of oral tradition, Anansi morphed, multiplied, and migrated, embedding himself in global folklore. In Jamaica, he became Br Anansi, a beloved, slippery figure who outwitted plantation bosses and rival animals alike. In the American South, he transformed into Br a rabbit, tricking foxes, bears, and authority figures in tales that, on the surface, looked like children's stories, but beneath, carried the same ancestral code, survived through strategy. His evolution is a masterclass in cultural camouflage. In Suriname, he is Anansi Kompanansi, and his stories are used in children's education. In Haiti, echoes of Anansi swirl into the trickster Loa of Vodou. In Brazil's Candomblé and Cuba's Santeria, his spirit fuses with other West African deities. Anansi adapted like no other mythic figure, because he was never fixed in form. Whether spider, man, or rabbit, he always stayed one step ahead. Even in disguise, he never lost his message, intellect over intimidation. Perhaps the most remarkable transformation occurred not in myth, but in mainstream media. Anansi inspired characters far beyond his origin: Bugs Bunny's mischief, Loki's chaos, and even Marvel's Spider-Man, a literal web-slinger fighting from the margins. Neil Gaiman's Anansi Boys reimagined him as a powerful African god living in modern times, blending magic with modern identity. In this new form, Anansi challenges not just other characters, but Western ideas of myth, power, and legacy. He forces modern audiences to reckon with a god who doesn't conquer by force, but by flipping every rule upside down. In schools, museums, and libraries across the world, Anansi stories are now told to children of all races, not as exotic tales, but as timeless fables. Animated shorts on YouTube, books in public libraries, and classroom curricula all feature Anansi. But few realize that behind these cheerful stories lies a figure forged in fire, the pain of enslavement, the complexity of betrayal, the strategy of survival. His global fame is more than a win for African storytelling, it's a victory for ancestral intelligence smuggled across oceans. Anansi's web is no longer just metaphorical. It's real, tied into diasporic memory, pop culture, and the subconscious of millions. What began as fireside folklore in the forests of Ghana now stretches into every corner of modern civilization. In a world obsessed with strength, Anansi proved that cleverness can become cosmic, that the spider's web, though delicate, is strong enough to shape history. He is not just African. He is global. He is everywhere. Anansi did not vanish with the empires that tried to silence him. Long after the kingdoms crumbled and the slave ships stopped sailing, his stories endured. His voice now lives in bedtime tales, in hip-hop metaphors, in street corner riddles, and even in memes. Where power adapts, Anansi adapts faster. He thrives in the margins, in the spaces between control and chaos, and he teaches new generations that survival isn't about brute strength but strategic brilliance. In every corner of the modern world where people are forced to outthink oppression, Anansi spins on. In Ghana, storytellers still gather under moonlight, beginning with the ancient ritual phrase, we do not really mean that what we are about to say is true, it is a spell of protection, an acknowledgement that truth can be dangerous. And yet, through that lie, Anansi tells the truth. Across the Caribbean, Anansi festivals celebrate his legacy with music, masks, and plays. In Harlem classrooms, black children read Anansi stories and find reflections of themselves, clever, underestimated, and unbreakable. He is no longer just a god, he is a cultural ancestor. But Anansi also confronts us with uncomfortable truths. He forces us to question our morality. What is wisdom without compassion? What is survival without loyalty? Are trickery and betrayal justifiable if they are the only tools left? In a world increasingly shaped by deception, digital misinformation, corporate manipulation, political propaganda, Anansi's tales read like ancient instruction manuals for navigating modern chaos. He was the original disruptor in a world addicted to disruption. Even more powerful is Anansi's reclamation. For centuries, African deities were demonized, called primitive, savage, or forgotten. But now, artists, authors, and scholars are reclaiming Anansi not just as folklore, but as intellectual legacy. His stories are being digitized, archived, animated, and reborn. African children are seeing their myths animated with respect. Diaspora youth are tracing their roots not through bloodlines, but through the rhythm of Anansi's footsteps. He is returning, not as nostalgia, but as prophecy. Anansi's web is still being woven, strand by strand, across continents and cultures. His spirit laughs in the face of conquest, in the face of time itself. The spider who once tricked the gods now teaches mortals how to navigate a tangled world. He is not past. He is present. He is the eternal storyteller, and as long as stories are told, as long as the oppressed dream of escape, as long as we can bend the will of tyrants, Anansi will never stop spinning. Anansi's tale is more than myth, it's a mirror reflecting the power of the mind over muscle, the resilience of culture over conquest, and the survival of spirit over silence. From the roots of West Africa to the corners of the modern world, his web stretches wide, catching fragments of forgotten wisdom and weaving them into stories that still matter today. He is the spider who defied gods, outwitted empires, and whispered freedom beneath the surface of fairy tales. If this journey through Anansi's world opened your eyes to the genius hidden in African mythology, then don't let the story end here. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to uncover more hidden truths about Africa, its legends, its legacy, and its unstoppable spirit.